Hello there, hope you're all warm and comfortable, and well, very warm welcome back to At the Movies with Andrew. I am Andrew. I go to a building called a cinema every week. I spend money on what I see there, and then I report back to you whether I felt that was money well spent. Pretty simple premise, really. And we are now into November of 2019, and yes, it is getting increasingly autumnal and wet and cold outside, except I'm recording this on a clear, bright afternoon, so that joke doesn't really work, so I try. But anyway, yes, this does mean that there are some Oscar baity movies on the horizon, and we'll get to those. We may even get to one of them today. But in the meantime, more than accident rather than by design, this month I came across a couple of franchises and sequels and reboots and remakes to properties that some of us never expected to ever see again. So perhaps, but was this a welcome surprise, or were these franchises and properties better off staying dead? Well, that's what we're here to find out, so if you're all ready, then let's get started. Right, for my first movie this month, I want to talk about a movie that came out 35 years-ish ago. God, I feel old. It was a sci-fi movie that everybody regards as a classic, and it was very well regarded at the time. Very praised for its special effects and for the central premise of this unstoppable killing machine or organism that was scary and threatening and posed a real threat to the main characters. It was very horrific and dramatic and effective, and so much so that the sequel came out a few years later and managed to be different and ramp up the stakes, and some would say was better than the original, but both were regarded as equally great pieces of science fiction cinema, and everyone was waiting for the sequel, the third movie, to arrive so we could cap off the trilogy. And when it did eventually come out, it was underwhelming in comparison, a bit lukewarm, lackluster, and it went okay, well, at least the trilogy's over. And then over the course of time, more movies came out that tried to reboot things or explain the lore and mythology and rehash and go through the same premise again, and all it did was just dilute the original, the feeling of the originals as a consequence. Those first two movies are stone cold classics. Nobody is ever going to argue with that. But this franchise feels like it's just treading old ground over and over again, and that the lore has been over explained to the point of feeling redundant and underwhelming. So where can we really go from here with this sci-fi franchise? But that's enough about the Alien movies. No, we're here to talk about Terminator Dark Fate, actually. Yeah. The sixth movie in the Terminator franchise, produced once again by James Cameron, the originator, but this time directed by Tim Miller, who gave us the first Deadpool movie. So you've got that, and that was a good movie, and James Cameron lost the rights for the third, fourth, and fifth Terminator movies, Rise of the Machines, Salvation, and Genesis. And yes, I refuse to pronounce it Genesis, because that's not how it's spelt. But you've got him back, and you've got him saying, and the tagline of the poster saying, "This is the day after Judgment Day." So forget 3, 4, and 5. The sixth movie is the real continuation of the Terminator storyline. So what bold new direction can we go in after the iconic Terminator 2? Well, naked robot man arrives from the future and steals the clothes of a police authority figure so they can hunt down a seemingly innocent woman as their target. blah blah blah. Another naked person arrives from the future to save this woman from the robot man and says some variation of "come with me if you want to live." Blah blah blah. Car chases and chasing away from this relentless killing machine robot, and oh, the car blew up or the building blew up, so they must be dead. And but no, it silently and menacingly walks out of the fire and the wreckage each and every time. This happens about 3 or 4 times, by the way, the exact same way. Blah blah blah. I have to save you from the robot because you lead the human resistance in the future. Not only that, but I have a personal connection with you in the future, and you personally sent me here for some mysterious dramatic reason. Blah blah blah. More chasing, more shooting, more action. Blah blah blah. Climax in a fiery furnace factory setting that results in a heroic sacrifice and the Terminator getting blown up. Blah blah blah. End scene. I'm getting in the car now and driving along the road as I get ready to face the future. Dun 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 dun. Roll credits. I mean, sorry about that. I mean, so do stop me if you've heard this story about 4 or 5 times already. Yeah, it was better than Genesis, but colonoscopy would have been better than the lackluster Genesis, frankly. Something else I should mention at this point, and this is probably what will tip many people over into distrusting this movie from the outset. Within the first 5 minutes of the movie, without going into details or spoilers, something happens. Before the opening titles have even rolled, something happens that is clearly meant to go, this is a bold statement, this is a bold message that takes us into an uncertain direction for this movie. But what it will mostly do to viewers and long-time fans is go, wow, so Terminator 2 was pointless now then. Everything we were ever emotionally invested in, the message and the triumph at the end of that movie was all for nothing, and you expect us to go along with this. I mean, watching that scene made me go, wow, those digital effects were convincing. It's amazing what you can do with computers nowadays, but that did set me off on the wrong foot from the start. But to try and get some positives into here, it was directed competently. Yes, it's a relentless in pace, so it's always engaging, and along with the chase of running away from this Terminator. So good to Tim Miller for that. And with certain action scenes, like, yeah, it's a car chase, but it's a dynamic car chase. And you do have scenes with with jumbo jets colliding into each other and a truck dangling off a dam there. But all this breaks the laws of physics, but it's exciting at least. So props for keeping this visually engaging at least. Linda Hamilton is back as Sarah Connor, and she proves that even in her mature years, she's still got that tough, badass quality throughout. She was very captivating in that sense, even though I felt that she's clearly smoked a lot of cigars in the intervening years because of what that's done to her voice. I mean, there was a scene where somebody wakes up and you hear talk fast. And I thought, oh, is that Arnold Schwarzenegger? Oh, that's Sarah Connor. Oh, all right. But overall, it was good to have Linda Hamilton back in the part after having Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, as young little Sarah Connor in the last movie. Sorry, I can't say that with a straight face. You have that. You have Mackenzie Davis as Grace, who's essentially the new Kyle Reese, and she handles herself. She's physically capable, I will say that, and she had a good, interesting character twist where she's cybernetically augmented. She's part of the resistance, but she's augmented, and she crashes after a fight. She gets fatigued and exhausted, and she desperately needs to inject drugs into her body to keep going. I thought that's an interesting way of making the character seem tough yet vulnerable. Otherwise, you've got Natalie Race. I'm not sure how to pronounce that surname, but she's meant to be our new John Connor, and she's given barely enough time to know or care who she is, given she's meant to be this important to the future of the human race. I mean, at the beginning, you've got her interacting with her family, and that whole Mexican setting, Mexico and the Mexican border, was at least, okay, here's an atmosphere and a setting, that milieu that we've not done in Terminator 4, before, I suppose. But after once the action sets off, she's either being scared or we have to stand and fight, and that's all there is to her. Yes, Arnold Schwarzenegger is back, but at this point, why is he even here? Because he's the Terminator and brand recognition, and in this one, it is just not Terminator without him. And yeah, he's an old man now, and they get round this by saying that he's a Terminator that developed a conscience, because of course he bloody did, and went into hiding and disguised himself as a human and became an interior decorator named Carl. That's our Terminator for this movie, apart from the bad Terminator, who is a special effect, but it was an engaging special effect of liquid metal morphing into two bodies, and that was different. But with good old Arnie as an interior decorator, infiltrator Terminator, you do get a line from him about a man wanted to decorate a little baby's bedroom in monotone colours, and I told him, don't do that. You have to use blue or pink or little baby girl colours. And I thought, that was a joke. That was a joke. All right, that was a good joke. I chuckled. But aside from that, anybody remember when the Terminator was supposed to be an unfeeling, scary killer? That whole line about it can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, it doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. Well, all evidence to the contrary. Yeah, it is a competently made action movie, Terminator Dark Fate, but ultimately it is very indicative of a creatively bankrupt franchise. I've summed up the premise. You have to run away from a bad robot from the future and put in the odd line like, I'll be back. And that's, at this point, it seems like the makers of this franchise, that's all they know how to do with it. There's no other way you can stretch this premise out or make it original. But Andrew, what about Terminator Salvation? That was set in the future. That was set in the Skynet robot apocalypse. You actually got adult John Connor as the leader, as a sort of mad prophet and last hope of humanity. You got to see the resistance fighters and the relentless army of Terminators. That was an original direction. Yes, it was. It's just a shame that Christian Bale had to flip his lid on set and ruin that movie's reputation for everybody, so we're stuck with stuff like this. Oh, and we'll be getting back to Christian Bale later in this episode, by the way. In the end, there was a decent effort on the part of the actors involved and the director involved, but Terminator as a whole, we've got killer machines and robots and time travel coming out every orifice nowadays, and trying to make anything more out of this, I'd say we should really forget it. Just please, don't make a Terminator 7. Please, don't be back. Yes, I said it, and I'm not ashamed of it. If the script is not going to try that hard, then neither am I. Admit it. Even if we can't edit the theme tune into this video for fear of YouTube copyright infringement, you all heard the music in your head, didn't you? Yes, they are creepy and kooky, mysterious and spooky, and altogether ooky. My next movie is The Addams Family, directed by Greg Tiernan and Conrad Vernon. This is another cinematic iteration, animated, computer animated this time, of the popular American sitcom cartoon family. They're a bunch of oddballs and scary weirdos, but deep down they're just a loving family that just want to get on with their lives and get on with the people around them. People that are old enough to remember the Addams Family, like from the 1990s cinematic, live-action cinematic versions, and even the original newspaper cartoon strip and sitcom that inspired it, will be pleased to hear from the outset that all the Addams Family tropes and isms are all present and correct. That theme tune that I did at the beginning, that is there at the end, complete with sing-along lyrics and a visual recreation of the sitcom intro, so that was nice for, again, for anybody old enough to actually remember that. And the Addams Family characteristics and dynamics are all present and correct. You've got Morticia Addams as the wife, who may say something in French and causing her husband Gomez to go, "Oh, my darling, my sweet, you know what saying French does to me." You've got Lurch as the butler going, "You rang." You've got the hand thing doing things with its fingers and hands. You've got Pugsley Addams as the explosive, loving little brother. And you've got Wednesday Addams as the quintessential monotone emo, always coming up with ways to casually maim or kill her little brother. So that's all there. This is from the, Craig Tiernan and Conrad Vernon are the directors, who previously helmed Sausage Party. And if I say you can tell, you might be getting images of the Addams Family swearing like there's no tomorrow, or engaging in lewd creative sex acts like the buns and the sausages and food items in that movie. And that is not what I mean, trust me. You can take your kids to this. No, what I mean is that movie was ultimately, let's face it, a very cheaply, very hastily made animated movie done by a clearly overworked animation staff. And there is a similar rushed, just above television quality to the animation in this movie. I mean, the set design is all authentic looking and effective, but you've got the crash zooms, you've got as a kids animated movie and made in modern times, so you've got the weird looking faces and over the top facial expressions and body movements. You may have noticed that I haven't really given a plot summary of this movie so far, and there barely is one. I mean, I understand the problem that this movie had from the start. You've got you've got a family whose entire shtick or joke is that they're weirdos, but otherwise they are the mother, father, siblings. They are a family unit that love each other and embrace what they do. They think what they do is normal, and it's the wholesome family people around them that they are the weird people, and it's a counterculture satirical message that worked for newspaper cartoons and for a sitcom. But how do you put these fun-loving sitcom characters into a dramatic film narrative and give them a story for them to go on and have stakes. I haven't seen the 90s movies since they came out, but I seem to remember that they just about got away with it with a we'll have a fake Uncle Fester in here and I'll inherit the family fortune. You got away with that. What do they do in this movie? Well, they have a town beneath the mansion being built by this exaggerated, vain, selfish celebrity interior designer that wants everything to be pink and fluffy and perfect, and oh no, that scary cloudy mansion is going to ruin my image, so I'll try and bribe them to have it redesigned, or I'll try and get rid of them by demonizing them on social media, and that's about it. Otherwise, it's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of bland moving around from place to place, really, and waiting for the climax to happen. But that being said, it does lead to a couple of interesting, well, subplots. One of which is interesting, one of which felt was mechanically arranged. The interesting thing is we have, from the discovery of the new town beneath them, we have Wednesday Addams engaged her own subplot of discovering the outside world and engaging in her own perverse version of teenage rebellion and non-conformity, but defying her mother's wishes by dressing in pink and having a rainbow unicorn hair locket, and this causes Morticia to be so horrified that her face turns pink. I thought, okay, that's a cute joke, and this gives Wednesday something to do. And but otherwise, with Pugsley the brother, we have a Mamushka. He's getting involved in some ceremony, rites of passage ceremony that Gomez is trying to train him for, and he's not quite doing it because it's a sword wielding thing and Pugsley prefers explosives. And Gomez at one point says, "Oh, this isn't working, I'm so sorry, I pushed you too hard." And I'm thinking, no, you didn't. You didn't push him at all. You just stood in the background looking awkward and embarrassed and whispering to Uncle Fester, "I don't think this is going to work." That's all it amounts to. And it's just a mechanism to get to the climax whereby Pugsley uses explosives to save everyone. Oh yeah, a mechanism to bring the whole family together so that we can have Snoop Dogg as cousin It. Okay. And Pugsley saves the day explosives, and that's his moment for the movie. Aside from that, oh yeah, I forgot the town beneath them is called Assimilation. That's about as subtle as the dialogue and the humour gets in this movie. Otherwise, you get things like the parents going, "Oh, they blow up so fast," and Morticia creating a bridge out of spiders and saying, "We call this surfing the web." Yeah, I'll let that sink in. But ultimately, it's... Oh, one more positive thing. These are celebrity voices. You've got Oscar Isaac as Gomez, Charlize Theron as Morticia, Finn Wolfhard, the boy from Stranger Things, because he's in everything these days, as Pugsley, and Chloe Grace Moretz as Wednesday. And with her, I felt, listening to her, all I could hear was Princess Kaguya. Studio Ghibli fans will know what I'm talking about there. But to give them credit, when animated movies these days are all about the celebrity voices, oh, it's that's Robin Williams, or oh, I can hear Eddie Murphy in that voice. No, they commit to these characters. They sound like Gomez and Morticia and Uncle Fester and the rest. So thank you for not drawing attention to the fact that you've got celebrity voices in your animated movie for the sake of it. Otherwise, oh, also One more thing, the designs of the Addams Family themselves. I've already mentioned the mansion, but the designs themselves were utterly faithful to the original newspaper cartoon strip, and I respect the visual style of this movie at least, but otherwise it's very much an Illumination knockoff, an Illumination Studios wannabe. I'm trying to think of kind of words here, but if you're a parent and you're disappointed that Hotel Transylvania 4 didn't come out this year to keep your kids quiet for an hour and a half during the Halloween season, then don't worry. Here's a thing with jokes and zaniness and zippy zappy pacing, and it will keep the kids quiet for about an hour and a half, but otherwise it's not going to leave much of an impact on you, and you are going to forget it. And yeah, if you are after the best possible version of the cinematic version of the Addams Family, you've still the 90s movies still come out on top, frankly, but it'll keep your kids quiet. Next up, we have Dr. Sleep. And I bet you, like many other people, are looking blank right now and saying in a puzzled tone, "What's Dr. Sleep? Is that some kind of new hospital drama on Netflix or something?" And then we and the marketing poster people for this movie have to explain this is a Stephen King movie. This is a sequel to The Shining. You know, that old movie? And, all right, okay, well, why didn't you just call it The Shining Part 2? Because we're trying to be subtle. Yeah, directed by Mike Flanagan, adaptation of a Stephen King novel of the same name, starring Ewan McGregor, Rebecca Ferguson, the next chapter in the Shining story, as the marketing would put it. So where do we go after the climax of the last movie? Well, it's many years later, and life has not been kind to Danny Torrance after he started receiving telepathic powers and creepy visions of ghosts, and had his father turn into an axe-wielding murderer and try to kill him. So yeah, a bit hard to recover from that, but he's grown up to look like Ewan McGregor. He's had alcohol problems, but he's getting over it now. He's moved to a new town and is working as a volunteer at the old people's home, where he uses his shining telepathic powers to help gently comfort the old people in their dying minutes of life. And that's pretty much the reason why this movie is called Dr. Sleep, because of that one subplot that turns up for like 5 minutes in the movie. But this would be going well if not for the fact that there's a girl living in this town who's got super incredible shining powers, and she's practically a shining beacon to Ewan McGregor, who's trying to put that part of his life behind him, understandably. But more so, there's this group of gypsies called the True Knot, led by Rebecca Ferguson's Rose the Hat. Gypsy names, who are immortal, quasi-immortal, and they make themselves immortal by kidnapping children, savagely murdering them, and sucking out their shining powers, literally sucking their souls. And they've been doing this for thousands of years with ready-made canisters, apparently, and they've detected this girl, and Rose the Hat is going, if we can find her, we will have an infinite all-you-can-eat buffet to become immortal forever. So it becomes pretty much the story of the reluctant veteran coming back to do one last job, as the girl says to Danny, "I know you've got the same powers as me, you need to help me out." "No, I don't want to." "Oh, you're in danger, and I suppose I have to help you out." And so they have to get away from these gypsies. They might have to flee to the one place that they can ensnare and trap and confront these gypsies. The Overlook Hotel, the ruins of the Overlook Hotel, where Danny himself will have to confront his literal and personal demons. So, yeah, directed by Mike Flanagan, whose work I'm personally not familiar with, but I've heard he's done the House on Haunted Hill miniseries, and more crucially, has done Stephen King before. He did a film adaptation of Gerald's Game. So, Stephen King must really trust him with his to do cinematic adaptations of his work, because I am not. Up until recently, I wasn't familiar with the original Stanley Kubrick film of The Shining. All I had in my head was the Simpsons parody. You know, the "You've got the shinning, don't you mean shining? Do you want to get sued?" And that's odd. The blood usually comes off on the fifth floor and stuff like that. But I was aware of background details, chiefly that Stephen King hated Stanley Kubrick's version with a burning passion. I think there was a real conflict of ideologies between Stephen King thought ghosts are scary versus Stanley Kubrick's ghosts actually offer a hope of an afterlife. So there was a clash there. There were one or two story details that aren't in the original book versions. So when Stephen King came to write Doctor Sleep in 2013, he very understandably stuck to his original book version and disregarded certain things that happened in the film. So Mike Flanagan, I imagine, he must have had to do a very delicate negotiating act with Stephen King. Like, I will respect your Doctor Sleep story, but cinema audiences are going to have the Stanley Kubrick film in their heads. They're going to expect certain things going into a cinematic sequel of The Shining. Can you please trust me to work out a way to merge the two versions together? And based on this film, can we please get Mike Flanagan to negotiate Brexit? Because he's done a great job in recognizing certain visual tropes and story elements of the Stanley Kubrick version, whilst sticking to the tone and atmosphere and style of a Stephen King story. Basically, if you're going to, I warn you, if you're going to go into this expecting the same cold, detached, vast, empty feeling of the Stanley Kubrick movie, don't. This is more melodramatic, more sinister and pulpy in comparison. If I had to make a comparison, imagine the Stanley Kubrick Shining as an art exhibition. Going to an art exhibition that's very deep and philosophical and abstract and in a cold, vast, empty building, and then going from that and buying and reading a very engaging, pulpy, darkly colourful graphic novel, a mature horror graphic novel. That's how I'd as the story and style of Doctor Sleep. Just to establish that. Ewan McGregor is great in this movie, although Ewan McGregor is Ewan McGregor in this, and also playing another grown-up midlife crisis version of a child character. Well, he's really cornering the market in that sort of thing after the Christopher Robin Winnie the Pooh movie a couple of years ago, isn't he? Also, there's a lot of mind reading powers and physical and mental persuasion and moving things with your mind here. And seeing Ewan McGregor in the midst of that made me think, wow, all those rumours of a Obi-Wan Kenobi streaming series, watching this movie, I feel that that could actually work. And Rebecca Ferguson, arguably more than Ewan McGregor, is the MVP of this movie. Just like most people think of Jack Nicholson being Jack Nicholson in The Shining, that's the one character and actor they remember. I think a lot of people are going to take away from this Rebecca Ferguson's very malevolent and sinister and quietly menacing and charismatic and dangerous portrayal as the villain in this, as the gypsy with her constant "well, hi there" to little girls, before turning into a feral savage monster, just stabbing them and preying on them and sucking out their souls. But also with her and her true not gypsy cult, I found their scenes very fascinating as they talk about their immortality, and they casually talk about they remember President Nixon and they remember being around at the Roman Empire. This double edge of immortality seemingly being attractive to new recruit Snake by Annie, and then when you see what they're actually like, these these wild animalistic predators living in bodies that turn into husks when they get drained, and seeing the curse of immortality rather than the blessing. I'm sure they go into it more in the novel, but I found their scenes very engaging and wanting to know more about that lifestyle and that little backstory. Little girl they got as Abra, the super shining girl. I can't remember her name right now, but she thankfully wasn't precocious or annoying or anything. She came more across as if Carrie had sympathetic parents. I imagine that's what Stephen King was going for there. As a horror movie, it's a very deliberately overlong, slow, deliberate pace to this movie. I think what's putting a lot of audience members off this movie is that it's not a typical jump scare reliant, fast-paced horror at all. No, this is a far more considered, mature piece with subtext, you know, and themes of addiction. The true not gypsies with their addiction to sucking souls and immortality, and Danny Torrance's addiction to alcoholism and how he's desperately trying to overcome his alcoholism because he does not want to end up like his father. And during a dark moment when all seems lost, he's about to pick up a bottle of bourbon, and you're practically willing him to not do that and to carry on the fight. Yeah. So that might put some people off. It's an overlong movie, maybe not its chapter 2 levels of obnoxious length and pacing, but it's close. The first half of this movie is more about character building, establishing the characters and where they are. It's more than half the movie, I think, before we actually get to the hunt and the chase and the running away from the gypsies. So that might put some people off, wondering where there are brief sinister horror moments, but some people might be wondering, when does the horror actually start? I recognize that. Oh yeah, the last third of the movie, the climax is at the ruins of the Overlook Hotel, and that's probably where Shining fans will get their Shining fix, because you get the Overlook Hotel and its decadence and decay, and you see all the old locations, like, oh look, there's the Here's Johnny door, the remains of the Where's Johnny door. And I imagine that Ready Player One a couple of years ago has kind of diluted the impact of this, but I did appreciate the attention to detail. Another thing I want to point out as a thing that made me, I respected what they were trying to do here. A slight spoiler, sorry, but some of you might be wondering, did they actually get Jack Nicholson out of retirement to play Jack Torrance again? Maybe with digital de-aging. The blunt answer is no, they didn't. I imagine they didn't have the budget for that. So what they've actually done here is they've got an actress who looks and sounds enough like Shelley Duvall to be Danny's mother in flashback sequences, and to recreate her horrified reaction to the "here's Johnny" scene. You've got somebody who looks and sounds like Scatman Crothers to be the ghost who comes to Danny and says, "You have to help that little girl like I helped you." And here's the scene that made me smile, is that Ewan McGregor walks into the bar at the hotel, and as he's looking down and around, and he looks up and he sees somebody who looks and sounds like Jack Nicholson saying, "So what will be your order, sir?" "Dad, is that you?" "I think you've mistaken me for someone else, sir. I'm just the bartender." Get it? Because he's become absorbed into the ghostly staff of the hotel, like the caretaker before him. And yeah, not only that, but I looked this actor up and I can't remember his name, I'm sorry, but that's Elliot from E.T. Elliot from E.T. grew up to look and sound a bit enough like Jack Nicholson. Mind blown. So with The Shining, I got a very similar, not the same, but very similar impression to Blade Runner 2049. Yeah, you have this old movie from the 80s which has a niche audience, so general audiences might not care for a movie that came out 40 years ago to see a follow-up to it. But I feel fans of that original will come away from this very, very satisfied. I feel that under the circumstances, a sequel to The Shining made 40 years later could not have been better made, in my opinion. Not a classic. Its overlong, sluggish pace might put some people off. It's a very slow and thoughtful kind of horror movie, and that might not really appeal to everybody. But I will say that it is at least a very comfortable, well, comfortable for a horror movie, watch it. And so for my last movie this month, we have Le Mans 66. That's what it's called here in the UK. But most of you will probably recognise it as Ford versus Ferrari. And I might actually instinctively go with that title in describing this, because in my personal opinion, it's a snappier, more captivating title. Yes, it is a tiny bit misleading because Ferrari themselves are always a background presence that's mentioned ominously, and Enzo Ferrari himself only turns up for like 2 or 3 scenes. So the focus is more on Ford versus Ferrari, but in comparison, Le Mans 66, it's a more factually accurate title, because that's what it's building up to. But Matt did say people might get confused with a previous movie called Le Mans, like, is this a sequel to that or something? Also, generally, Le Mans 66 just sounds like an aftershave my dad would use. But starring Matt Damon and Christian Bale, and directed by James Mangold, who brought us the 310 to Yuma and Logan. So we're off to a good start here. I don't know if it's been confirmed at this point, but I'd be very much surprised if this wasn't an Oscar contender, an Oscar baity movie. And like all good Oscar contender baity movies, this is based on true events. To set the scene, it's the early 60s, and the Ford Motor Company is going through a bit of a sales slump. which the executive team do now attribute it to a image problem. They say because Ford is a car that your parents would use to do the shopping and the groceries and drive around the local neighborhood. They are seen as very stodgy and unattractive cars that young people don't really want to go for. Kind of like today, actually, but I digress. There's a line of dialogue that made me laugh that does sum it up. That when one character says to Henry Ford, the boss, Sir James Bond doesn't drive a Ford. That's because James Bond is a drunken degenerate. But they've clearly got a problem here about how to market Ford to the young kids. And one guy comes up with the idea of, what if we built a racing car and competed in the Le Mans 24-hour Grand Prix? That would really drive our image up to the young people of today. One big problem with that, they don't have a racing car division established, and two, Ferrari cars have been the undisputed champions of Le Mans for quite a few years now. We can't possibly compete with that. But we may not have to compete with that because the Ferrari company is on the verge of going bankrupt. They've built such stylish, cool, wonderful cars that they've exhausted their finances and they're looking to sell to somebody. We could buy Ferrari off them if we go over there and negotiate with Enzo Ferrari, the chief of Ferrari. And they go over there and they explain, yes, we'd like to buy Ferrari off you, and then we will have our brand on Ferrari and we will dictate going to the Le Mans Grand Prix and, going forward. And this does, unfortunately, Mr. Ferrari does not react very well to this, saying that you've insulted my national pride as an Italian, and it basically devolves into the French taunters from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, even though they're Italian, basically going, I fart in your general direction. Your mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberries. I probably mixed that quote up, but... Oh, by the way, while we've been arguing with you, my men have gone round to Fiat and made a deal with them, so bugger off, get off my property. And Henry Ford doesn't react very well to this, saying, right, those so-and-sos have made this personal. We're going to build our own racing car. We're going to compete in Le Mans, and we're going to wipe the smug smile of that Italian so-and-so's face. So, first step to going about this is to contact racing legend Carroll Shelby, played by Matt Damon, a charming, handsome Texan former racing car driver, because he developed a physical condition after a race previously. He can't race anymore. And to this film's credit, he takes this with better grace than you would expect in a situation like this. He's just quietly gone on to sell and manufacture cars. So he knows the ins and outs of how to go about this. But he says, well, it'll take more, especially against Ferrari in such short notice. You're going to need more than resources. You're going to need a driver who knows, maybe not knows the track, but knows the spirit of racing, knows the car they're driving. And that's my good friend Ken Miles, played by Christian Bale. Problem is that Ken Miles is a typical hothead. He's a Brummie. He's from Birmingham. He loves his Thai food tea. He's a loving family man, but he's greasy, he's coarse, and he doesn't know the meaning of the word negotiation or compromise. So how is Carroll going to work with that? How are they going to build a car in such a short amount of time? And more to the point, how can they do this with the approval or disapproval of the Ford Executive Committee? A bit long-winded, I'm sorry, but that's the essential premise. I really like this, and central part of this movie is the chemistry between Matt Damon and Christian Bale. They are a comically odd couple, with Matt Damon as the charming one and Christian Bale, as I said, as the greasy, hot-headed one. And props to Christian Bale for making himself skinny and lanky enough after being Dick Cheney in that Vice movie. But a typical conversation will go with another guy coming in, with him going, "Oi, are you telling me that my chassis and my windscreens are not up to your precious health and safety standards? Well, I tell you what, mate, I'm gonna get this wrench here and I'm gonna shove it so far up your bloody arse that you're gonna sing and take this health and safety book up your bloody arse." No, Ken, please don't. No, don't worry, sir. My friend doesn't really mean what he's saying. Yes, he bloody well does. You know, it's scenes like that, and Christian Bale especially does give off the feeling that there's more to his character than just being a hothead. Firstly, he's got his mother and his young son, so you see the compassionate side of him, the thoughtful, compassionate side of him, and that he is passionate. He embodies that character. He knows the purr of the engines. He knows the exact rhythms of what needs to be done, whilst Matt Damon handles the business side and the publicity side. And he's on Christian Bale's side. They both want to get this done, and they both share the common enemy of the dickhead executive played by Josh Lucas, saying that we don't want this greasy limey representing Ford. And that's kind of the heart, that the essence of this movie as a whole. It's about cars. It's a dad friendly subject, I know, but it's more than just cars. At its essence, it's the story of creative people with a vision and working under strict time and resources, but they know what they want to get done and they are committed to it. And it's creatives versus executives, studio executives, corporate executives, that you appreciate they're looking after their money, their image, but they're standing aloft going, "We don't approve of this, change it, remove this." And the creatives bucking heads with that. No, Ken knows what he's doing. You have to trust us. And the consequences of when they don't trust him, and the delicate negotiations of all that. That was very riveting. And it's a 2-hour movie, and yet I did not feel like certain other overlong movies recently. There wasn't really any ounce of fat, or there was never a scene that was pointless or could be trimmed. It all flowed very well. And director James Mangold did his job. Very accomplished effort here. But with the race car track, the low angles of the race car tracks and the point of view shots inside the car and the close-ups of Ken Miles and his intense concentration, that was all there, along with a thumping good 60s authentic soundtrack like Chicka Boom, Chicka Boom, Chicka Boom, Chicka Boom. I felt really engrossed, enveloped in this world for 2 hours. I was never bored by it. Any nitpicks I can really come up with? I suppose it should be pointed out that there's only one female character in this, the Christian Bale's supportive wife, and she's only really there to be the supportive wife. She does get a comical moment inside the car when she's arguing with Christian Bale, but that's about it for her. But to sort of counter that, I really have to give this movie credit that this is set in the 60s. It's a man's world of cars with a very male attitude of pride and accomplishment and old-fashioned male attitudes, perhaps, and that's all it needed to be. And James Mangold recognised that and stuck to that. There's no gender bent or race bent characters in this. There's no sense that the script or the characters or the true life history has been compromised or adapted to suit real life modern day politics. And that is a real breath of fresh air in a world of Terminator Dark Fate and the Charlie's Angels reboot that I've heard about and don't want to touch with a 50-foot barge pole. This is an old-fashioned, dad-friendly movie of cars and men, and all credit, all respect to that. There was another thing that I'm trying to remember right now. I'll just move on to the audience that I went with that were engrossed in this. I was sat next to a young man and his partner, his wife, girlfriend. I'm going to make assumptions here, and they did gasp and cheer whenever Christian Bale lost his temper and punched somebody. But the last scene, without spoiling it, it's Matt Damon having a conversation with somebody, and that somebody says something innocent and innocuous, and this causes Matt Damon to start welling up with tears, and this caused the girl sat next to me to start welling up and burst into tears, and I felt this movie has really touched her, and it's an exciting movie of driving. And yeah, the climax at Le Mans is every bit as intense and non-stop as you'd expect this to be. Is it as melodramatic as, say, Tom Cruise in Days of Thunder? Maybe not that close, but it was well done. Oh yeah, the last nitpick. As a film about cars, there's a lot of dialogue about gearboxes and flanges and chassis and bonnets and hoods, and you have to reduce the capacity of the hood by 35% to increase torque and speed, and the hum of the gearbox, ooh, it might crash and burn after 7.5 miles. Jargon, basically. That did bring back memories of when I was volunteering at a motor museum as a teenager. Standing in that museum and watching this left me flummoxed with, I don't know what the hell you're passionate. You volunteers or characters in this movie, you clearly know what you're talking about, but I'm passionate about it, but I'm just flummoxed. And I'm sure as a viewer, I'm not alone in that. So, those nitpicks aside, this was a very engrossing, well-acted movie that I'm finding very hard to say anything negative about. It was 2 hours of cinema, very well spent. And I am going to give this a very, 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 very high buy it. So, yeah. With that last review there, I can very confidently say that Le Mans 66, or Ford versus Ferrari, whatever you want to call it, I am definitely calling it my recommendation of the month. I think we are definitely into awards baity territory here. I can see this being on my best of the year list somewhere. We definitely need more old school, true life, true story, well acted movies like this that don't feel the need to pander to current agenda politics. That does sound like I'm seguing into Terminator Dark Fate as a binnet. That's not why I am putting it as my binnet. I'd like to stress that very hard. Terminator Dark Fate is my binnet of the month because this is a good example of a franchise that does not need to be a franchise. It just needs to die at this point. We've stretched this concept beyond breaking point. Can we just have Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day as stone cold classics and just move on with our lives, please? Right. Well, with that, we've only got December left before this year, and indeed this decade is well and truly done with. And I look forward to whatever festive treats December 2019 has to offer. In the meantime, have you seen any of these movies, or what movies did you see in November? If you've got any thoughts about that, do comment down below about that. But in the meantime, I hope you'll join me for the end of 2019 on At the Movies with Andrew. In the meantime, do like, comment, subscribe to this, and keep an eye out for other videos on Matt's movies, music and more. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace out.